Hi, everyone. Welcome and good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you're tuning in from. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Hayla Alawi, and on behalf of Atmosphere Press, I am pleased to welcome you to today's live author reading of new fiction. We'll be hearing from Jeffrey Butler reading from Torment, a Harper Jones novel released on August 27th. Edward Correia reading from Self-Inflicted, a novel released September 24th, and Scott Bollens reading from Precipice, When Algorithms Triumphed, released October 7th. All three authors' books can be purchased both from online retailers and from select bookstores. And of course, the books can be viewed on Atmosphere Press's website. That's atmospherepress.com/books. I'm also going to put direct links to each book in the chat here for everybody. At the end of today's event, we will have time for audience questions. So during the readings, if you have a question for one or more of our authors, go ahead and type those in the chat and I'll make sure they get asked. Please do stay muted for the duration of the event, but do feel free to use the chat for praise and comments in addition to questions. And one last note is that we at Atmosphere Press appreciate your support today and always. If you have a manuscript of your own, we would love to read it, so submit your work today to books@atmospherepress.com. Again, thank you so much for tuning in and supporting Jeff, Eddie, and Scott today. We're going to start off with our first reader, who is Jeff Butler. Jeff was born on an army base in Wiesbaden, Germany, and raised on the New Jersey shore. After graduating from Cornell University, he went to work in hospitality management and began writing as a hobby. This is his first Harper Jones book in a planned series of novels that take place in the seaside town of Wolf Hollow. Jeff now lives with his wife and 3 children in the beautiful Finger Lakes region of upstate New York. Torment begins on an early fall morning when the sleepy oceanside town of Wolf Hollow awakens to a gruesome crime. Veteran detective Harper Jones and his new partner, Medora Dunning, must track down the perpetrator quickly before he strikes again, all the while slowly learning that not everything and everyone in this unsuspecting paradise is what they seem. Let's welcome Jeff.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to come out here and listen to us, us authors. I'm going to start reading from chapter 1 and see where it takes us for the 15 minutes. So chapter 1. The man's labored grunting kept an eerie cadence with the wind whistling through the tall pines. Occasionally, he paused to catch his breath and gaze up at the hunter's moon, a puff of chilled air rhythmically escaping his mouth and a sheen of cold sweat on his forehead reflecting the moon's pale glow. After a minute or so lost in thought, the man shook his head, spraying tiny droplets of sweat onto the small mounds of freshly turned dirt scattered around him, and picking up his shovel, he returned to his work. 20 minutes or so later, the man's persistence paid off, as the last swing of his shovel resulted in a solid thump of metal on wood. As if in agreement, the wind seemed to rise up for a moment, shrieking in glee, only to subside suddenly as the man let out a short, harsh bark when he realized that he had reached his goal. Reaching up out of the pit, the man set his shovel against a plain granite stone, then bent back down and, falling to his hands and knees, began to feverishly claw at the rest of the dirt covering his prize, his breath coming in faster gasps as anticipation spurred a surge in his adrenaline. Rapidly, the dirt was cleared away, revealing the outline of a large oblong wooden box, approximately 7 feet long and 30 inches wide. It was built from hardy oak and nailed solidly shut around the edges, but the man had prepared for this. With a nimble leap that belied the bulk underneath his heavy coat, he leapt out of the pit and walked over to his car, a beat-up late 90s American model, its hubcaps missing and uneven dents, bruising its tired frame. Reaching in through the driver's window, he fumbled for the latch and popped the trunk. Walking quickly around to the rear of the car, he rummaged through a burlap bag, eventually producing a chisel, a worn hammer, and an iron crowbar. Slamming the trunk shut, he strode back to the open pit with his tools and jumped back in, a hollow, dull echo coming from the wooden box as he landed. Scrambling off the lid, he crammed himself between the box and the dirt wall of the open grave. Quickly, he took the hammer and chisel to the wood around the nails. When he had enough of a nail showing, he switched to his crowbar and began prying the nails loose. One by one, they came free, some of them screeching as if in dying protest to being ripped from the wood. The man's strident gasps had turned to pants of excited anticipation as his goal was finally coming into reach. With a last powerful tug, the final nail gave up, and with a small cry of triumph, the man tossed the tools out of the pit. Wedging his dirt-encrusted fingers under the edge of the lid, his thick shoulder muscles bunched under his coat, and he heaved up, straining against the weight of the lid. Then, with a mighty toss, he threw the box cover onto the wet grass above, turned and gazed down at his reclaimed prize. There, nestled in the velvety innards of the oak box, was the slightly desiccated corpse of a woman. The skin on her face was drawn tight from dehydration, her hair a dark reddish brown, but brittle and wiry. Her eyes and mouth were both closed, but even with the ravages of time and the funereal makeup, it was readily apparent that in life this was once a beautiful woman. The man was now gazing down at her with something akin to rapture, his eyes wide, glowing in reflection of the watchful moon. His mouth was open, grinning wide, his lungs pumping out heavy bursts of the cold, chilly air. Straddling the dead woman with his arms at her sides, and his hands slowly opening and closing, the cold mist coming off of his sweaty head in wispy trails, the man looked almost otherworldly. Kneeling down over the woman, he fumbled in his coat pocket, finally producing a small bottle of petroleum jelly. With shaking hands, he hastily unscrewed the cap, and with a thick, grimy finger, scooped out a small amount of the gooey product. Raising his finger, he began to apply the Vaseline to his lips. Just then, a large dark cloud began to cover the moon as if to darken the innocent world of what was to come. The man then leaned down over the woman and with his hand gently brushed the dry hair away from her forehead. Bending lower so that his face was inches from hers, he gazed into her closed, dead eyes, his cold, moist breath caressing her cheeks. "I finally found you," he uttered in a hoarse, low whisper. Then, bending lower, he gently kissed her forehead, the wet Vaseline becoming an unholy bridge between his life and her death. Chapter 2. It was dark, with only occasional beams of moonlight filtering through the dense canopy of trees. My lungs were bursting as I ran, ducking and weaving through the woods, branches whipping past my face. Ahead, a shadowy form flitted in and out of my vision, spurring me on to run faster. I could hear frantic panting interspersed with whimpers of fear as the shadow ran with even greater urgency, defying my attempts to gain ground. A distant part of my mind recognized this scene as one that I had experienced countless times before. Nevertheless, I pushed harder, frantically trying to close the distance. Summoning strength that I didn't know I had, I uncoiled violently and leapt over a fallen log, ducking a bough as I started to gain ground. Then suddenly, a gunshot cracked. I snapped awake with a groan, the dream dissipating as the clouds in my consciousness began to disperse. Just as my brain was beginning to accept the fact that I wasn't chasing a ghost, I registered the repeated humming bleats of my cell phone. Muttering a low curse, I rolled over in the dim pre-dawn light and reached out, fumbling around on my cluttered nightstand. Finally locating the source of my irritation, I squinted at the bright blue rectangle and recognized the backlit name. I hit the green button, officially announcing my entrance to the coming day. "Jones," I croaked out, my dry vocal cords protesting the rude awakening. "Harper, it's Addison," the voice replied curtly, identifying itself as Addison Barnes III, my newly minted police chief. "Sorry to wake you so early, but there's been an incident relating to one of your open cases. You need to get down here ASAP." Mentally shaking the cobwebs permeating my foggy head, I ran through my 4 open cases. Propping myself up on an elbow and clearing my throat, I replied, "Which one, Dela Cruz?" referring to my most recent case involving a small-time thief who had been identified as the culprit who had knocked over 2 pawn shops and a jewelry store. "No," Addison replied, "it's Newton, Allison Newton." That name instantly cleared my head. My most confounding case, a vicious murder, one that I honestly felt would be making its way down to the cold case files in the very near future. "Newton," I asked, fully alert now, "what the hell happened?" "She's been disinterred. I need you to get over to the cemetery, now, before the media catches wind of it, Addison added. Dug up? Allison Newton? I asked myself, swinging my legs over the edge of the bed. Why and who? On my way, I replied to Barnes, thumbing my phone and casting my eyes around my bedroom, ignoring the sudden dizzying head rush that suddenly enveloped me. Clicking on the bedside lamp, I rose quickly. Rising and heading towards the bathroom, I paused at my dresser to pull out some fresh clothes. Grabbing a shirt, my eyes strayed to 3 framed pictures on the wall. The first showed 6 figures dressed in military camouflage, with 5 of them encircled behind my kneeling figure. All 6 of us were giving the camera a hard stare underneath black berets, and our right arms were held straight out, clenched fists facing down, each with a small tattoo just above the wrist. Second photo was a family picture depicting my parents, me as a teenager, and my toddler sister in front of a Christmas tree with a golden retriever sitting happily in attention by her side, his pink tongue lolling out. The third was a picture of my sister again, this time as a young adult. She was dressed in a blue graduation gown, and her long dark hair was pulled back under an indigo mortarboard. Her sparkling brown eyes matched her excited smile as she looked into the camera, clutching a rolled diploma in her right hand. A pang of guilt hit my gut as my gaze passed over the photos. So much life in those vibrant eyes, I thought. I reached up and briefly stroked the picture of my sister with the tips of my fingers, then turned and strode to the bathroom to splash some water on my face. Dwelling on the past wasn't going to help me, not today. A few minutes later, after clearing soapy water from my tired eyes, I looked into the mirror at the face staring back at me. I was 42 years old with hazel eyes and dark wavy brown hair that was beginning to beat a steady retreat off of my forehead. The day-old dark stubble on my jaw was peppered with flakes of gray, and a white scar on my cheek that I had received from the wrong end of an assailant's knife gave my face a tough and weathered look. Reaching up, I gently fingered the dog tags on a leather strap dangling from my neck. Squeezing the tags in my fist, the tendons in my forearm tightening into the small tattoo, I gave silent homage to Carter, Blackjack, and Payne, and Josie. Opening my eyes, I brought a hand towel to my face and scrubbed vigorously, feeling a satisfied sting of stimulated skin cells, wakening in the morning. Striding back over to my dresser, I reached for my Army-issue G-Shock watch, and my glance drifted to a wedding band mixed in with my keys and loose change in a small ceramic bowl. Grimacing slightly, I strapped on the watch, grabbed my keys, and finished getting dressed. Chapter 3. 5 minutes later, backing out of the driveway of my suburban townhouse, I mentally calculated the quickest way to Great Oak Cemetery and had a Starbucks on the way. Allison Newton, I wondered again as I pulled out into the early morning traffic. Dug up? What the hell? As I began the 15-minute drive, I reflected back to Allison Newton case 6 months ago. It was the first week of March, and true to its reputation, March was roaring in like a lion. At the time, I was on the night rotation, and on this particular night, the wind was fiercely whipping snow against the station's frosted window panes like little flash white diamonds, tapping lightly to get my attention. Inside, central heating was struggling to keep the old leaky building warm, as evidenced by the noisy space heaters squatting in the corners of the room. My partner and I were doing busy work on our computers when our phone line suddenly rang. Jarring us out of our respective dazes, startled, we looked at each other across our desks, then at the phone. My partner reached first and brought the receiver to his ear. Kaplan, he growled. Anders Kaplan, my partner at the time, was one of those types whose voice fit his looks perfectly. A beefy, middle-aged Belgian immigrant in his late 40s, Anders always sported a scruffy graying beard, outlining his fleshy, careworn face, complemented by an untamed full head of wiry graying hair. If he had ever worn a dress shirt and a tie, I had never seen it in the 12 years that we had worked together. Today, he had on a flannel red and black checkered shirt, rumpled trousers, and black work boots. The only way you could tell he was a detective was the shield strapped to his belt and his sidearm holster that fitted over his burly shoulder. Okay, he said after listening for a moment. Where? More silence. On our way, he replied as he hung up, jotting something down on a coffee-stained pad with a chewed-up pencil. Stared at him, waiting. The room was dead silent except for the whirring of the space heaters and the ongoing scratching of Anders' pencil. Well, I finally asked impatiently, what's up? Anders looked up, seemingly oblivious to my tone, his pencil hovering. Give me a sec, he muttered, returning to his notepad. Anders has been a naturalized citizen for almost 16 years now, but he still has difficulty writing in English, which I've never quite understood, but have learned to work with. Sort of. Taking a deep breath, I waited. Anders finished writing and announced, reading from his notes. Homicide off Wilkes, alley, behind the strip mall. You ready? He asked me, heaving his bulk out of his creaky chair. I stared at him. It took that long to write down that one sentence? Shrugging on his overcoat, he turned, glared at me, and was about to bite off a retort, but instead muttered something I can only assume was in Dutch, and headed for the door. Sighing, I let it go. Anders and I had been working together for 12 years. He was a solid detective and a good friend. And 11 years ago, he had saved my life. Twice. It was a rare occasion where Anders and I had to use our sidearms. We were chasing an alleged kidnapper through a campground outside of Wolf Hollow. He was a deadbeat father who had swiped his 5-year-old son from his ex-wife's home and spirited him away while holding her at gunpoint. She had immediately called us and we responded, tracking him to a campsite. There we found the kid in a tent, but the father, seeing us coming, had fled. Anders and I split up, with me pursuing the father while Anders raced to cut him off. The road curved around the campground, and as I was chasing him around the bend, the father suddenly wheeled, pulling his gun. I had been running full tilt, and when he stopped and whirled, it caught me completely by surprise. He had me dead to rights as he raised his gun and took aim. As I prepared to throw myself to the side of the road, despite the sinking feeling that I would be too late, a shot rang out. The man jerked, spun drunkenly, then collapsed to the pavement. Pulling my gun, I raced to the prone body, keeping the barrel trained on his motionless torso. I reached the body and immediately kicked the gun out of his lax grip. He had been shot in the right shoulder, but he was still breathing. Looking up, I saw Anders hustling up, gun pointed to the ground. As I was about to compliment him on his shot, I heard the sudden roar of a car engine. Spinning, I saw a red souped-up sports car hurtling towards me from the bend, the dim outline of a woman at the wheel. As I raised my gun at the streamlined hulk of metal bearing down on me, I was suddenly thrown aside as Anders collided with me, tackling me out of the way of the oncoming missile. As the car flew past, it clipped my leg, pinwheeling Anders and me into the ditch. We found out later that the ex-husband had a girlfriend and that she was caught 12 hours later on Route 1 on her way to Florida. I suffered a dislocated knee, which sidelined me for 2 weeks, but it could have been a lot worse if it wasn't for Anders' marksman skills and quick instincts. Is that about 15?
That's actually perfect timing. Well, thank you so much for that reading, Jeff. We really got a good introduction, obviously, to the story. So, leaving us with something that we want to learn more about. So I just put the link for everybody for Torment one more time in the chat. So reading next today is Eddie Correia. Eddie is a Washington, D.C. attorney and adjunct professor at American University's Washington College of Law. He was chief counsel of the Senate Antitrust Subcommittee and special counsel to President Clinton for civil rights. In Self-Inflicted, President Melissa Harding faces the convergence of catastrophic climate change and a pandemic deadlier than COVID. She's thrust into a race against time. As the crisis escalates, Harding grapples with the realization that these barriers to effective action are not inherent in our country, but are self-inflicted wounds. Eddie, take it away.
Thanks, Hala. I'm going to read 3 excerpts, one sort of close to the beginning, one kind of in the middle, and one close to the end. Center for Disease Control and Prevention, Atlanta, Georgia. The senior staff of the virus monitoring section convened again a little after 5 p.m. Alan Gordon, the section director, sat at the table while everyone drifted in. Gordon seemed energized, eager for battle. He had stayed fit over the years, even though his hair was thinning and he had acquired something of a paunch. He had kept razor thin during his teaching years, riding his bike back and forth to campus. Now he sat in his car 2 months, driving into the CDC from northeast of Atlanta. He resolved this morning to get back on the treadmill. When people were seated, he opened the program he wanted on his laptop and returned to the graphic screen. I'll tell you what I've learned since this morning, Gordon said. The bad news is this looks like a very destructive virus. I won't say deadly because we don't have any deaths yet, but this thing wreaks havoc with sensory nerve cells, particularly in nerves from the eyes and ears. We have a more detailed report on the molecular structure of this thing. It's big with a diameter over 500 nanometers. The LA lab claims it can even be seen with a high quality light microscope. I'm skeptical of that, but there is a consensus that it is large and spherical. It has an affinity for sensory nerve cells, but we don't know why. We need to get our cell neurologist in here to tell us if there are special receptors in those cells that might link up with the virus. Does anybody know? No one spoke up. Have we been able to do any tracing? Asked Dr. Walensky, posing the same question he had asked at the morning meeting. We do know a few things based on patient interviews. The academic patients all went to a conference in Chicago that was held at Northwestern's downtown campus. All of them went to dinner together on the third night of the conference. They shared food, passed a drink around, kissed each other on the cheek, and so on. Here's the intriguing thing. The one person at the dinner who was not from the US is a professor from Mumbai, India. We tracked him down with the help of India's National Disease Center. He's in the hospital now with almost total vision loss. His name, let me see, Gordon flipped through his notes. His name is Kabir Kumar, Professor Kabir Kumar. He was interviewed this afternoon. Kumar's recollection of events is the same as everyone else's. 6 of them went to dinner. They shared an appetizer. They passed around a drink, all things that could lead to a small transmission of saliva. And this is the showstopper. After he was pressed by the investigator, he admitted to buying a pet monkey for his children the day before he left for the US. Apparently, it is illegal to have monkeys for pets in India, but the investigator pried it out of him. The morning of his flight, the monkey bit him severely. He had to wrap the wound to keep it from bleeding through his shirt. There were audible gasps around the table. My God, a monkey to human viral transfer, Mumford said. Everyone was silent for a moment. That could be bad, very bad. So, second excerpt. The Oval Office, Washington, D.C. President Harding asked to meet with her Attorney General, Robert Abrams, and the CDC Director, Emanuel Greenstein. Harding sat on one of the sofas in front of the fireplace, and Adams and Greenstein sat opposite her. Marty Tolson, her Director of Legislative Affairs, and Ron Carter, her Chief of Staff, pulled chairs close to them. What are we going to do, guys? Asked Harding. Part of the executive order survived the Supreme Court's decision, but it may not do much. I'm getting discouraged, but I know we can't give up. What do you think, Bob? We would likely have had 5 votes if Foster and Garrison had participated, said Abrams. I know Helen's family, but I could never speak with them directly. I have heard indirectly that she does not have long to live. At some point, both Foster and Garrison are going to have to resign from the court, said Abrams. I assume that Rutherford's family at least is clinging to the possibility that she might recover. She's only 65. She has a lot of years left on the court. It's not easy to come to terms with the fact that you have to give up something that is the pinnacle of your life. She could certainly function with no eyesight and no hearing. There are assistive devices that can help along with personal aids. If anyone can do it, Lisa Rutherford can. She is one very smart and very tough person. But you've read the medical reports. The damage goes beyond the sensory nerves. It affects your mental functioning, and at some point you have to go on a respirator if you choose to. A lot of people are choosing not to. Sad as it is, I think we have to assume neither one of them is coming back. As for the executive order, Abrams continued, getting people vaccinated presents a difficult set of problems, Madam President. I don't have a good solution. You're going to have to get something stronger out of Congress, and even that might not be enough. How are we doing with the states? Asked Harding. How many of them have imposed their own vaccination requirements? 10 states so far, Madam President, said Carter, with bills pending and 12 more, which are likely to be enacted. The problem is that all these are states where the great majority of people will get vaccinated voluntarily. Damn, this is frustrating, said Harding. I can't just sit back and let this virus sweep over us. How do we eradicate this thing? She asked Greenstein. This could destroy a civilization. Viruses have destroyed civilization, Greenstein said. The pre-Columbian civilizations in the New World were essentially destroyed when Europeans arrived and made contact with people that had never been exposed to viruses that were carried by the explorers. Whether our civilization would actually be destroyed depends on your definition of destruction, Madam President. but it's no exaggeration to say that unless we can achieve some very high levels of immunity, eventually a third of Americans or more might lose their eyesight or their hearing or both. And that same tragedy will be going on around the world. We can try to close off contact with people from outside this country, but it's virtually impossible to do that. We're going to have people trying to cross over our southern border, desperate to escape infection in Nicaragua or Honduras or Mexico. They will be begging to come into the US thinking they can be vaccinated. It will be a very ugly scene at the border. The court's membership may change dramatically very soon, said the Attorney General. It is likely, Madam President, you will have to fill 2 new Supreme Court vacancies in the near future. Jesus, Bob, I haven't thought much about filling a Supreme Court vacancy until I read the news about poor Helen the other day. It's very sad, I know, but you may have to send up nominations in the next few months, even sooner. If we can get the Senate to move quickly, you can get a different outcome on a new bill. In other words, said Harding, we have to get Congress to pass a new bill on vaccinations, get 2 new justices on the court, and hope that a majority upholds a broad executive order requiring everyone to be vaccinated without religious exemption. And then we hope that people really will get vaccinated. And all the while, a vicious pandemic is maiming and killing our people. And we also have to go back to the court on the climate bill and hope we get a better result. That's about it, Madam President. Okay, Demon, that's what we'll do. Later excerpt, home of Robert and Marianne Weaver, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Marianne watched through the window as 3 women climbed out, 2 from the front seat and 1 from the back. They were carrying 2 brown paper grocery bags. She recognized 2 of them from the dreadful visit to the church a month ago. The 3 women disappeared under the eave of the front roof. A few seconds later, she heard the door opening. Bob must have given them the key, or maybe he left the door unlocked. What the hell was he up to? Half a minute later, she heard voices outside the bedroom door. Marianne, honey, we have some food for you and the children. The voice was polite and gentle. Who is it, Mommy? Asked Michelle. Some ladies are visiting us, sweetheart. Marianne turned back to the door. Why are you people doing this? Marianne demanded. She tried to keep her voice calm. We're going to move this dresser and put some bags of food into the room, honey, but don't give us any trouble. Let me out of here. You have no right to keep me locked up. Your husband wants to talk to you before you do something crazy. It's for your own good, yours and the children. When I get out of here, and I will, I'm sending the cops after you. That attitude is going to keep you locked up. I'm sorry, honey, but that's the way it's going to be. Your husband left strict orders. Finally, in the evening of the 3rd day, a little after 6, she saw the same Chevrolet coming up the drive, followed by the pickup truck. 3 people got out, 2 of the women who brought the food and Bob. The 3rd woman parked the truck in the circular drive and climbed out to join them. Bob was between the 2 women, but he was not walking on his own. There was something wrong with him. It was obvious. He staggered as he walked. 2 of the women propped him up, one on each side with an arm under his. They disappeared from view under the porch roof as they approached the front door. My God, they were all coming in. 4 adults against the 3 of us. And the women were strong. She could tell by the way they were able to move the dresser. She could hear his footsteps coming up the stairs. He was walking very slowly. God, he must be drunk again. She went over the plan again. Get the kids out the door first. They would run for the truck while she fought with Bob. Knock him out, kick him in the groin, whatever it took. Marianne, I'm back. His voice was weak and raspy. I want you to know I'm sorry I had to do this. I was trying to save the kids. It sounded as if he was pausing to catch his breath. I need your help, honey. I'm going to open the door. Just give me a minute, then I'm going to need your help. She heard the sound of the dresser sliding along the floor. Bob was pushing one corner, then another, gradually freeing up room for the door to open. Finally, Marianne saw the space widen between the door frame and the door. Then there he was. He stood there panting without taking a step into the bedroom. The effort to open the door had exhausted him. Finally, he took one step into the room, then another. He wasn't looking directly at her. What the hell was he looking at? She waited until there was clearly enough room, then reached out her arm to push him aside. He stumbled backward away from the door. Run, kids, downstairs. Remember our plan. Now, The kids knew that tone. It wasn't a request. Mommy needs to talk to Daddy. The two children hesitated for a moment. They had not seen their father for 3 days. Downstairs, Marianne barked. The two children weaved around their father and headed downstairs. I need your help, Marianne. Please, baby, I can't see. She knew what this meant. Stay away from me, she shouted. He took a clumsy step toward her and tried to grab her, but she moved to one side, and his arm flailed harmlessly past her. She slung the gym bag strap over her shoulder. He moved toward her again. She kicked him between the legs as hard as she could and watched him double over in pain. He took another step and fell forward. She stood over him for a moment as he lay face down on the floor. Michelle was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. Where the hell was Michael, and where are the keys to the truck? Finally, she found Michael in the kitchen looking in the refrigerator. Come on, honey, we need to go. I know you're hungry. She took his hand, and when he resisted, she swept him up in her arms. Her left wrist still ached from the edge of the door. Mercifully, her cell phone was there too on the counter charger. She pulled the charger cable out of the wall and the phone with it. Michelle, come on, we have to go. I want to talk to Daddy, she said. Not now, sweetheart, we have to go. Open the front door. She could hear Bob stumbling down the stairs. She heard the crash of another fall and a string of obscenities. For a moment, she hesitated. Should she help him up? No, she couldn't. He was contagious. He had to be. The symptoms must only have begun in the last 2 days. Those crazy bitch women must have realized they had a blind, virus-infected man on their hands. What a surprise. Instead of taking him to the hospital, they dumped him here. Where the hell are the keys? There, on the table by the door. The obvious place. Her mind raced. Grab the key with my free hand and get the kids out the door and into the truck. Luckily, Michelle was doing what she was told. She was already out the door. 3 more steps and she would be there too. Suddenly there was Bob standing in her way. He looked woozy from the fall. His arms reached out, but he could not see where to put them. She stepped to the right and stamped her foot loudly. When he reached for her, she stepped back to the left and felt the threshold of the door. If she could only get through the door and slam it shut, it would at least delay him, but that was too easy. She felt his hand on her shoulder, first gently, then grabbing her shirt in his fist. She lowered Michael to the ground. Get in the truck with your sister, honey. We're going for a ride. She turned to face her husband, and he released his grip on her shirt. You had no right to lock me up like that. You have to help me, honey, please. I need to go to the hospital. You have to take me. Don't touch me, she shouted. I've got a knife. Don't take another step. I mean it, Bob. This is going into your belly. The threat made him hesitate for a moment and take a step backward. Marianne turned and sprinted toward the truck. She lifted Michael again and put him over his shoulder on top of the gym bag strap. She heard him complain, but there was nothing to do about it. Michelle was already in the truck. Thank God she listens. What a wonderful, smart girl. With her left hand, she pulled open the driver's side door and pushed Michael inside. He tumbled onto his sister's lap. That hurt, Mommy. I'm so sorry, honey. She slipped the key in the ignition. One flick of her wrist and the engine was running. She jammed her foot on the accelerator and pulled away from the house. She could see Bob in the rearview mirror stumbling up the drive. His mouth moved, but she was too far away to hear the pleas for help, the curses, the threats, whatever it is. Thanks.
Thank you, Eddie. And I know this is kind of subject matter that a lot of people obviously now we can relate to in some way, but I think just the raised stakes were so clear from that reading. So let me put that link in there for the chat. And now our final reader for the day is Scott Bollens. Scott is Professor of Urban Planning and Public Policy and Warmington Endowed Chair of Peace and International Cooperation at the University of California, Irvine. For 25 years, he has studied urbanism and political conflict in contested cities throughout the world. His most recent scholarly book is Bordered Cities and Divided Societies. Precipice is his third novel. It's inspired by today's troubling and unquestioned insertion of artificial intelligence into everyday life. And it is the prequel to Restart, Stories of the Cairn Age, 2021, and Reform, Combating the Algorithmic Mutation, 2023. In Precipice, Interconnect, an advanced artificial intelligence supercomputer, emerges as a beacon of hope for humanity. Jared Rode, a disillusioned academic seeking meaning, witnesses the disturbing rise of algorithmic control over human behavior. Torn between two realities, Jared experiences psychic turmoil as he's drawn into a machine-curated world fostering narratives of hate and division. We'll hear more now from Scott himself.
Thank you, Hala, and very nice to be here. Let me get this set. Okay, I'm going to read two excerpts. One is early on in the book, and it talks about how the protagonist Jared Rode is experiencing this supercomputer that is very powerful. It's connected to us through chip implants in our ears, and it's on 24/7. You can turn it off, but most people don't, because the narratives being spewed out by the supercomputer are absolutely compelling and addictive. The narratives that the supercomputer likes the most are narratives of hatred and grievance as a way to divide people, divide groups. And this is what Jared experiences early on, what the experience is like being connected to interconnect. Excerpt, this is the first excerpt. I feel a seductively addictive quality to the experience, a sticky quality to its storylines. Compared to the meandering and messy emotional dramas of my own thinking, shipping into the machine provides me with a sense of stability, a feeling of being complete and correct. It provides me with a bluster of self-righteousness that preempts my doubts and character defects. My own thinking seems inferior, burdened with self-doubt, insecurities, and instinctual desires that sidetrack my mind. But with interconnect, all is crystal clear in solid black and white instead of the wishy-washy watercolors of my own mind images. When I'm connected, I feel more empowered, but weirdly less in control. I feel complete, but I also feel subordinate. That gives you a little sense of the experience. Now, this is 2/3 of the way through the book, this next excerpt, and it's longer. And it's Jared, the protagonist, dealing with these split realities, a machine curated, fabricated reality where he is a militia soldier as part of a group called the MAJ, versus his own organic reality, which is him as a disillusioned academic. So the machine curated storylines present in black and white or noir, and the organic storylines present in watercolor. This excerpt is longer. Okay. The lovely pulsing surge of interconnect, its blackness. I'm anchored, solid, virtuous, impregnable. I'm thrilled to be part of a team that launches sarin biobombs across the Travertine River. They explode about 200 feet from us. I can smell the poison's nasty burned rubber odor as gentle hot breezes bring some of the smoke from the bombs back our way. We laugh at the fact that such bombing is against international law. Trying to apply law in our country is like wanting dogs to follow technical manual instructions. The day's been a good one for our side. Many are killed on the opposite side. Many more are undoubtedly disabled due to the poison. We have the upper hand in this part of the war compared to the larger war that envelops our country. We take a break. The evening is spent with colleagues in a shithole tavern safely on our side of the divide. Only a randomly hand-thrown GBU-14 bomb could get to us. That's unlikely enough that we can get stupidly inebriated without concern for our safety. The pulsing surge of interconnect in my head steadies me and rewards me with euphoric vibrations. I saddle up to a fellow killer. His fight name is Savage due to his prowess. He's a great fighter. Once saw him sniper out a Perner exoskeleton 6,000 feet away. I was with him weeks ago in Gem, the city of Gem. We sit now at a makeshift table, a battered door turned horizontal, held up by crates positioned on each side. Two working women are at the next table eyeing us, leaning over to display the pushed up cleavage of their restructured breasts. Pungent perfume and drippy mascara. One I would do, kind of an Oriental Anglo mix. The other, not so sure, kind of swampy. I still prefer the sight of organic women such as these, though, over fembots, although technological sculpting of the female body is improving daily. A bushy beard obscures almost all of Savage's face. Nose hairs merge with beard to make one continuous field. He reeks of battlefield, sweat, blood, and the distinct almond odor of exploded bomb. I've never seen him not wearing his chest rig. I get the sense he may sleep in it. Although gauzy and almost pussy, his eyes remain on battle-ready alert status well into our 10th drink of Borka. Drunk on this horrible liquor of the Baldwin area, it tastes like fermented figs and raisins. We struggle to put together words. Have you ever think doing anything other than this? I slobber. Dude, that's my entire life, says Savage. Can't remember doing anything other than this. From the time I was born until now. There's not another life. I slur. There are times when I image another life, like a dream, foxy E-vision beauty, you know, fuck trophy. I can't finish the sentence as my head becomes heavy and drops to the table. You with foxy woman? That's laugh, said Savage. Maybe after you dead. I come to enough to know one of the women is all over me, rubbing against my body like a seasoned pro. She's the better looking hybrid Asian. Her fingernails are painted orange and they stand out amidst the dreary noir atmosphere of the tavern. I have a vague sense this means something, this color. I push her aside. My head is spinning too much. The wooziness is morphing into what feels like a caving in of my brain, the ice pick cleaving my brain in two feeling. The noir view of the tavern flips into an image filled with a dizzying array of colored pixels. I try to stay with the watercolor and not freak out. Behind the pixels, I can make out a hologram-like image of a woman and two children, maybe young adults. A feeling of familiarity. I must know them. The dots resort. An image of a man behind a podium in a large auditorium. A cleaned up, younger version of me. He talks like he's an authority. Audience members look at him and want something from him, me. The pixels rearrange. A man spooning a woman in bed, both asleep. She's wearing no top and the side of one breast is tantalizingly exposed. I feel a spark of energy, a desire. Another shuffling, a group of individuals in a library-type chamber. They are discussing something. I know them, but I can't remember. I don't know whether they're friends or foes. My mental screen goes blank white, then changes to a darkened tavern. There's a sleazy woman at the next table. A man is sitting next to me. He's talking to me. It's different here than elsewhere in the country. Our opponents here have some messed up shit in their heads. Too much synth, I don't know. They seem like another species here. I can't talk yet. I do recall this is Savage and gradually remember where I am. I can help. Can you help me, Savage? You in pain, Rhodey? I got some pills. No. Can you just tell me what just happened? You were kind of zoned out. I assumed you were PTSDing it. Fucking docs tell us to just ride it out, so I didn't want to jump into your storm. How long was I out? I'll say 20, 25 minutes, enough for me to get some pleasure from this delicious night lady next to me, he says, pointing to the swampy gal at the next table, now looking particularly deranged. It was a wild trip, I say. Did I say or do anything? Something about Terry or Carrie. It was a lot of garble, my friend. Carrie? I think she's my ex-wife. I think back to the image that first came up. Two individuals with a woman. I think they're my children. Caleb, Ellie. There's a faint memory of these people, like a twitch in my brain. But it feels fake, like it's implanted in me, a false dream. The color image has a cartoonish quality to it, like it was composed by some apprentice-level artist. It must be the machine having its fun with me, maybe trying to give me some entertainment amid the rigor of fighting. Savage then says, you also mentioned something about organics. Given the slop we eat out here, figured you were talking about food. Organics? They're the group of genuine thinkers I used to be with. Hearing that, my head shakes involuntarily. Ice picks slicing my head open. Visual aura closing in on me. Tremors. Dude, you okay? Here, have some water. I see a hand to my side with a glass. I slump and nearly fall to the ground. I think several patrons are now gazing at me. I feel emptied. Back to the watercolor enclosure. A man wearing a top hat, suit, and bow tie. A woman in a fish's wardrobe and wearing cat eye glasses. I know these people, I think. They're organic thinkers I met with in my real life. A man looking out at the assembly of young people. He looks at his reflection in a side window of the auditorium. That's me. I used to be a professor. A man's penis is enlarging as he lifts his right leg over the woman's body. The woman turns over and spreads her legs. That's Raven. I live with her. I whipsaw back to the darkened tavern with several people looking down at me. It's savage, I think. I lift myself up gradually with assistance and sit clumsily on a chair. My hands are sweaty and I grip the arms of the chair tightly. Spinning has stopped. I feel stable again. Some part of me is in both these places, I stutter. Silence. I have no idea how this can be, but I live in two different realities. There's no connection between the two. I know I sound insane, and the uncomprehending look on the faces of my outlookers certainly reinforces that perspective. I come out of whatever that was, however, not feeling particularly insane, but rather possessing greater clarity that I am living two lives. This explains so much of the chaos in my life over the past years. Savage is satisfied that I'm not going to die and not knowing what the fuck I'm talking about. Seems to think it's either drunkenness or a bad trip. He sloppily gets out of his chair, knocking it over, and grunts that he is leaving. Hey, sweetie, hybrid Asian lady murmurs as she sits on my lap. I feel her warmth and curvy figure. She holds out her painted fingers so I can easily see them. These women are like flies on shit. Hey, I'm here because I'm an insert, she whispers in my ear. Do you remember what that is? Just leave me alone. I need to be by myself. I give her 10 V-bills to whisk her away. That's probably half our pay given how poor our country has become. I'm not who you think I am. You spoke about two realities. I come from that other reality to prove to you that it exists. You saw images of that other world, didn't you? How do you fucking know this? She looks down at the piece of paper. You're a former academic. Your partner's Raven. You have 2 kids. You've met with organic thinkers. I focus on her orange finger polish. Colors saturate my view. I hear her mumbling something hard to hear. She's speaking very slowly, like a teacher to a juvenile. The machine implanted this storyline into you, you as MAJ member, filled with hate for the perners and the fronters. It is all fable. It's a myth created by the machine. You think you have 2 realities. That awareness is a start, that actually you have 1 reality and 1 fabrication. I can help you get back to that 1 reality, she says as she yanks on my ear and takes my chip implant out. My mind feels like it's alternatively shearing off and reconnecting. Colors sharpen into perfect focus, then blur out in the shady noir. Tavern is receding from my view. I'm shaking. I'm emerging from a nightmare. My only connection to the other world escorts me out of the tavern. We step hesitantly into the war city and start to run like hell. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Scott. I feel like we got a lot of tension from that. So that's a really good way to set that up for us. So thank you so much for that reading. At this time, we have time for our audience Q&A. So if you have a question for one or more of our authors, please go ahead and type that in the chat and I'll make sure it gets asked. Right now, we've already got a couple questions to start us off. So this first question is for all three authors. Question is, all three of these stories touch on topics that speak to today's current issues. What is a message you would like readers to take away about some of these themes? I'm thinking if we could go in reading order. So, Jeff, do you want to start us off with this one?
Okay. Yeah, the issues I guess that I touch on are um, and typically absolution and well, there's some revenge and absolution in there, and there's obviously a lot of conflict going on in the world today, and I tried to basically distill those thoughts and what's happening in the world down into a small town atmosphere, and hopefully bringing about a good resolution, a positive resolution to it.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's so much that just affects everyone at every level, so kind of bringing that
Bringing it
into
to
the book. Yeah, it makes it have that real feeling. So, yeah, I can see how that kind of influences every decision with that. Eddie, what about you? Is there a message you would like readers to take away about some of the themes in your book? Um, I'm not actually seeing. I wonder if Eddie's connection a little bit. Let's jump to Scott first, and hopefully Eddie can hop back in. But Scott, what about you? Is there a message you would like readers to take away?
Definitely. The whole trilogy is a cautionary tale of how much algorithms can control us. It's an exaggerated projection of many of the things that are happening today, with echo chambers reinforcing different sides, the us versus them dynamic. And it is cautionary. I started the trilogy during being mesmerized by the QAnon phenomenon in real life, and how people believed some incredibly crazy things. And I thought, if the echo chambers of computers, social media today can do that, they can maybe do a whole lot worse than even that, including putting us into competing camps, competing groups, and with military military parts to it in the future. So it's exaggerated intentionally, but it's not that far from what has gone on in terms of the us versus them dynamic today. And I hope this trilogy does not happen, certainly, but it sure was fun to write.
Yeah, keeping it in the realm of fiction maybe keeps it as fun as possible. But yeah, I mean, there's so much there that you can really unpack related to real life events. So yeah, I can totally see where those parallels are coming about. Eddie, the question is, what is a message you would like readers to take away about some of the themes in your book?
Well, the title Self-Inflicted refers to problems that we have really imposed on ourselves. Um, Partisan politics, misinformation on the internet, um, a Supreme Court, I think, that's making it very hard to pass legislation. So all those things, that's the idea of self-inflicted. So the president has to deal with all those, and in a very difficult situation where you've got didn't read anything about climate change, but that's another theme of the book, and this terrible pandemic that's worse than COVID. So it's sort of a commentary on can we deal with big problems like that?
Yeah, I think it's a question that is on a lot of people's minds these days, especially as we approach November. So
Yeah.
it definitely leaves a lot to think about. We've got another question for all three authors from Ed. The question is, could you tell us about your next book or work? Scott, do you want to start us off with this one?
Yes, my current work is called Memory Pool, The Memory Pool. It's totally different from this trilogy, and it deals with technology that allows us to revisit our memories and go into a restored memory of our past. And the novel talks about what memories would people tend to choose. Would those restored memories be the same as we remember them? And if they're not, what are the consequences for people's psyche as they move forward? So a little bit of some similar themes with the trilogy, but different also, different enough and different characters.
Yeah, I'm always fascinated about media that focuses on the mind and how it can be affected and what kind of power it has. So I'm really excited to hear about this and that
Mhm.
exploration. Eddie, what about you? What's next for you as a writer? Oh my, I hope he didn't lose internet connection again. So I guess again we'll jump to Jeff now. What are you working on next?
Put on the spot. All right. Yeah, my next book is the sequel, is the next Harper Jones novel. It's going to be called Pawns. About halfway through writing it right now, and it's going to take place obviously in the same town with the same protagonist, Harper Jones, and it involves in a personal side of it, he's exploring reconciliation with his ex-wife, which we haven't met yet in my reading reading earlier today. But there's politicians that are being murdered in town, so that's a mystery that we're going to. I also delve into Harper's past a lot more. There's a person or some people from his past come back to his present. So I actually go back into his history, so we get to learn a little bit more about what makes him tick and what how he's been molded. Since obviously he has a military background to begin with. So there's a couple different things in play that I'm trying to bring a little bit more depth to the characters.
Yeah, the second book in a series is always super exciting because it could go so many ways.
Yeah,
So I think that's a really exciting development to be on the lookout for. Um,
definitely.
we've, yeah. We've got one more question for the authors. This question is from Tony, and the question is, I'm curious as to how these authors decided which parts of their stories they would share with us tonight. And I'm realizing I've actually never heard an author speak on their process of selection after the fact. So I'm also very curious to hear about this. So maybe reverse order this time. Jeff, how did you pick this reading?
Okay. Well, obviously, I picked the first couple of chapters of my book. The first chapter with the man digging up the grave. That's my hook. That was, it's deliberately supposed to be impactful and grab the reader and want them to read more. Uh, Find out who is this person? Why is he doing what he's doing? He's kind of like the epitome of evil, almost, is what I planned on for him. And by having him right in the forefront, right in the beginning, people see, wow, this is where this is going. And then the rest of the reading that I did today was to introduce Harper, to give people just a general idea in the beginning of his background a little bit. Obviously, it's a very shallow background that I give today, and like I said before, it's going to be delved a lot deeper into the second book, and also later in this book as well a little bit. But I wanted to be able to give the reader just a sense of evil and sense of where the book's going to go.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I always love jumping in from the beginning. I think the beginning is something that so many authors spend all this time on, so you might as well share it, right? So,
Sure.
yeah, and you really
Doesn't
painted
give
that
anything away.
picture. Right, exactly. Also that. Scott,
There's a
what
lot of
about you?
twists.
Yeah, definitely. But
That's a
Scott, how did
that
you pick your reading?
that's a great, interesting question. An author, I think, when he picks or she picks a excerpt, you have to choose between like a descriptive excerpt that gives context but isn't that exciting, versus an excerpt that is really juicy, full of dialogue, full of tension, but may not have the context. So it's a difficult balancing act. So the short excerpt I read was descriptive, kind of, sets the scene, but I went for more of the juicier, the more interesting, juicier, tension-filled excerpt, the longer one I read. So I kind of tried to combine both, but it's a very interesting venture, trying to pick out of a 300-page book what 4 or 5 pages to read. So
Right. It's definitely a challenge. It's almost like, picking favorites, which is impossible to do as a writer. But I think you all did a great job of showcasing so much with your work with those selections. So it really paid off. So I just want to take a second to say at this point, thank you to our authors for putting in that work and sharing these novels with us. Um, it's been so wonderful just to hear these books come to life in the voices of their own creators. So thank you again to Jeff, Eddie, and Scott for
Yeah, I'm
being
just,
here
let
with
me,
us today.
we,
Oh, go
around the
ahead. Yeah,
country, around the country and lost our internet. So I apologize, but I
totally
enjoyed
fine.
this, and Jeff and Scott really enjoyed listening to your work. So
thank
thanks,
you.
Ayla, for putting that together.
Yeah, back at
Of
you.
Thank you.
course.
Thank you, Hala.
Yeah.
Yep.
Of course. And of course, thank you to everyone in the audience as well for being here with us and celebrating these authors with us. I am going to put the links to all 3 books in the chat one more time for everybody. Definitely be sure to check those out. Please also consider checking out atmospherepress.com, where you can browse our new and forthcoming releases, sign up for our email newsletter, and of course, you can submit a book manuscript of your own. So submit your work to books@atmospherepress.com and just let us know that you attended today's event. But again, thank you, everybody. We look forward to hearing from you. But until then, have a great rest of your weekend.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.